Do you want to learn how you can implement Jest and unit tests in your serverless environment? In this video, that is exactly what I'm going to be teaching you how to do. Hi guys, my name is Sam with Complete Coding, where our aim is to make you into the developer that you want to be. In this video, we're going to be looking at unit testing in the serverless framework. And we're going to also be looking at how we can use certain plugins to mock out DynamoDB to make sure that we can test the full scope of our application. Unit tests are great because it allows us to test small sections of our code to make sure that they run as expected. This means in the future, once you've got all your tests set up, if you make a bit of a change to your code and run the tests, you can know that it has the same underlying functionality, or it could break the test. And then you need to look at either changing the code to make sure that it passes the test, or changing the test. Now you need to update those with a new set of functional requirements. We're going to jump into the code now and see how we can set up testing with Jest in our serverless project. Now that we are in the repo, we can start testing some of our code. The first part of code that we're going to be testing is the API responses, and these are going to be unit tests. Before we start any testing, there's a little bit of setup to do. So first, in our terminal, we need to run an install of Jest. So npm install save dev, and we're installing Jest. Whilst this is installing, we also need to create a new file in the root of our directory, and we are needing to call that jestconfig.config.js. And in this file, we need to export some configuration for Jest. So module.exports equals object. And for this, the only config we're going to go with for now is verbose is true. And what this will do is it will make all of the test scripts log out exactly what happens. Once you've actually written all the scripts, you can turn this off to reduce the amount of information put into your terminal. So now that has installed, we can head over to our API responses. So at the moment we have a couple of functions in here, and what we want to do is test each of these. As this is a unit test, we want to put it at the same location as the file itself. So create a new file, call it API responses.unit.test.js. This is the way I like to do it, as it describes more verbosely exactly what you're doing, and saying that it's a unit test or an integration test, it just makes it a little bit clearer. The first thing we need to do is import the responses. So I'm actually going to copy that from inside our endpoints. If we scroll to the top, I'm just going to copy this line and paste it in here. As we have Jest installed, now we can write some tests. The first test we're going to write is just testing that responses, returns an object. So test and responses is an object, and this is how we write tests. I'm not going to be teaching you exactly how to write tests. There are brilliant tutorials on YouTube for that, and I'll link some of those up in the top of the window just here. So now you've got a test. We need to expect that responses is going to be an object. So the way we do that is type of responses dot to be, and that is going to be an object. Now we can save this, go into our terminal and run Jest, and this will run the tests. As you can see, we have had one test passed and one test suite passed. Now we're going to write some more tests for the rest of the functions in this API responses. Next one is going to be testing that 200 works. So test underscore 200 works. So with this, we want to first generate the response from 200. So const res equals responses.200, and we're going to pass in something like name of Josh. So now we have the response, we can expect a few things. We can expect res.statuscode to be a 200. We can also expect that the body is going to be a string, so expect type of res.body to be a string, and we can also expect there to be some headers. So expect res.headers dot content type to be a string of application JSON. So now we have these, we can run Jest again, and we'll retest these. And now we can see we have one test suite, which is one file that has passed, and there are two tests. We can do something very similar for the rest of the functions in here. So we're going to have one for 400, one for 404, and we're also going to test this define response. So if we go back into our tests, we can copy this 200 and paste it. This time we're going to be testing a 400. Response.400 to be a 400. Testing a 404 with responses 404, and we expect the status code to be 404. The last thing we want to test is inside API responses is this underscore define response. So test define response. And in here, res equals responses.define response. And we're going to pass in a status code. This time we're going to pick a random number, so 382, sorry, and some data, which I'm going to say any is a string of thing. Now with this res, we can do some more tests. So expect res dot status code to be, and that is going to be a 382. And finally, that the body is going to be a string. Res dot body to be, and this time what I'm going to do is JSON.stringify, and I'm going to pass this object in here and see if these do match. Now we can run Jest, And hopefully all of these will pass, proving that all of the functions inside responses work as expected. If we made a change in here that changed the functionality and we reran these tests, they may start failing, implying that we either need to update our tests to work with the new functionality, or that the change that we have made is actually a breaking change and that we need to check out that we have not messed up the code. Now that we've done all of our unit tests with this API responses, we're going to move on to Dynamo. Dynamo is a little bit different because in this we are using the AWS document client. We don't want to have to mock out the whole of the client. So what we're going to use is we're going to use an npm package that allows us to do this much more easily. That npm package is something called shelf/jest DynamoDB. So we're going to do npm install --save-dev, and it's at shelf/jest-DynamoDB. And whilst this is setting up, we need to do a couple of extra things to describe the Dynamo tables to this plugin. The first thing we need to do is go to our Jest config. And at the moment, it is just saying that it's a verbose, but we also want to add the preset of at shelf/jest-dynamodb, which is telling Jest that we are using this. And now we need to create a new file, and this is going to be called jest-dynamodb-config.js. Now this needs to be a JavaScript file which describes the Dynamo table that we have. To start, it needs to be a module, so module.exports, and it exports an object. This object has tables, which is an array. Now in this case, we only have one table. That table, if we look in player score.json, looks something like this. What we can do is we can copy this object from inside table and paste it inside tables. If we save this file, we can do one more thing. As we're not actually using the provisioned throughput, we can change this to be billing mode pay per request. Now this is set up, we are telling Jest that we have a player points table, which we're going to copy, and it has an ID that is a key type of hash, and it is a pay per request table. Now that we have this, we need to go back up into our Dynamo.js file and make one slight change so that we are definitely going to be using this plugin so that we can test using Jest. When we were testing using offline, we used this to change the region and endpoint. And we're going to do something similar for Jest. So, if process.env, and we're going to be using jest underscore worker underscore ID. So if that is valid, it means that we are in a Jest test. So what we can do is we can set the options to be an object, an endpoint of http://localhost:8000. That is the common one that we're going to be using. We also need to set a region, and this time the region is going to be local-env. And finally, we need to disable SSL, so SSL enabled is false. This just means that these options will be passed into the document client when it's set up, which will mean that we are using the Jest version of Dynamo. With this all set up, we are ready to start making our DynamoDB tests. So we're going to write a new file inside our common called dynamo.unit.test.js. And now in here we can start creating our code. The first thing we need to do, like in the API responses, is actually import Dynamo. I'm going to go into our player score, and I'm actually just going to copy that line from there and paste it in to get us started. Now that we have our Dynamo in here, we can do some tests. So test. First thing we need to do is test that Dynamo actually exists and is an object. So test that Dynamo is an object. And in here we expect the type of Dynamo to be an object. If we now run our Jest function again, it will run, and this time we expect to see there are two test suites. That is the API responses test suite and the Dynamo test suite, with a total of 6 tests. Next, we need to test that we have all of the functions on Dynamo. So in Dynamo, we have a get and we have a write. So if we go into our tests, we can test Dynamo has get and write, and expect Dynamo.get to be a function, and we also need to say this is the type of Dynamo.get, and what we can do is copy this and change this one to Dynamo.write. So now we're just testing that the get and write are functions that are available. The next thing we want to do is test that the write actually works. To do that, we need a couple of things. We need some data and we need a table name. So I'm going to create a const valid table name. And what I'm going to do is scroll back to the DynamoDB config and copy this table. Go back into our unit test and paste it in there. As well as that, we need some data, which is going to be an object. On this object, we need an ID, and this can be some random numbers, as well as an ID. We need a score. I'm going to go with 25. And finally, we need some more details such as a name, and I'm going to go for Chris. So now that we have all of the parameters we would need to do a write, we can create another test. This time we are testing that Dynamo write works, and we create the function. This time we're going to make a little bit of a change at this point. Previously they've always been normal functions, but in this we're calling Dynamo, which can be asynchronous. So what we're going to do is we're going to declare that this is an asynchronous test. And now we are going to hit Dynamo. We're going to hit Dynamo by wrapping it first in a try catch. So in the try, we're going to have a response. And we can now, because this is an asynchronous function, await it. And then it's dynamo.write. And the data we are passing up, we already have, as well as a valid table name. If this is successful, then what we want to do is we need to expect that there is going to be a response of some data. So expect res to be the same as data, because that's what we're passing up, that's what we expect to get back if it is successful. As well as this, we need a catch. Inside this catch, all I'm going to do is console log error in DynamoWrite test, and then log out the error. So if we run this now and it falls over at this point here, it's not going to hit that expect statement, and it's just going to console log. This won't actually fail the test because we're not saying that it has to have hit this. We can actually do that by at the very top saying expect dot assertions of 1. This means by the end of this function, there needs to have been exactly one expect run. So if this DynamoWrite falls over, the await is going to error, and it's going to go into this catch block. We're going to log it out and then finish the function. And because there hasn't been any assertions, because we never ran this line of code, this whole test is going to fall over. So what we can do now is go into our terminal and run Jest and see if this can work. This does take a little bit longer than normal tests, but there we go. We have 2 test suites and now 8 tests passed. The last thing that we want to do in this unit test is we want to test that we can now get data that we have just written into our database. So we are now testing that Dynamo get works. Again, this is going to be an asynchronous function. And in here, we are going to do some very similar code to up here. We are going to use a try catch. We're going to get a response by awaiting Dynamo get. And this time we need to pass in an ID and a table name. The ID we needs to be this one up here. So we can actually pass in data.id and the same valid table name. As we've done before, we now need to expect that the data is similar to ID, but strangely, the way this works, it can actually reorder the data when it comes back from Dynamo. So instead of it going to be equals, or instead of it being to be data, which means that it has to be in exactly the same order, res expects to equal data, which is a little bit different to what we've done previously. After this try, we always need a catch. And we're going to, again, console log out the error. Error in Dynamo get of the error. And again, to make sure that we do hit this assertion, we are going to do expect dot assertions of 1. Now we can save this, run Jest again, and we should see now that we have two test suites, and 9 tests. You can now build this out for as many of your functions as you like and as many of your files. Anywhere that you export a function or a module, you can test to make sure that it works exactly as you expect. In this video, we have learned about how we can apply unit testing to our serverless project. We started by looking at the responses file and testing that all of those functions in there acted as we expected. We then looked into testing our DynamoDB function. This was a little bit more complicated as we needed to provide a way of mocking DynamoDB. We did that with an extension of the Jest plugin, and that allowed us to test that the DynamoDB file all worked as expected. Testing is a brilliant way of ensuring that the code that you put out is always going to work, and catching anytime you make a change that it doesn't affect the overall functionality of your code, which can lead to some very strange bugs. If you've learned something new in this video, make sure to give it a like, as it helps more developers like you see these videos. And if you want to see more in this series, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on a bell notification as I release more videos in this productionized serverless series. Thank you, and I'll see you again next time.